Omaha. I was working in the nursery. Well, actually, I was working in the lab, and I went up to draw some blood. And this is like 5 o'clock in the morning. And I smelled pancakes. Well, this is a nursery. You're not supposed to eat in the nursery. I didn't really want to get anybody in trouble, but I wasn't thinking. Of course, I wasn't thinking. So I said to one of the nurses, I smell pancakes. And she said, that's impossible. All I smell is, well, I'll tell you what she smelled, but it had to do with babies and bowel movements. So that's all she said. I said, no, I really smell pancakes. And she said, that's impossible. It's against the rules to eat in here. You know that. Nobody ever eats in the nursery. And I said, I still smell pancakes. And she said, aren't you the guy that ate Christmas cookies up here last Christmas? And I said, yeah, I am. And she said, well, you know you're not supposed to have cookies up here either. And I said, I still smell pancakes. And she said, I don't even know what you're talking about. So I wandered around, I drew all the babies I was supposed to draw. And one of the last babies I drew, lo and behold, the baby smelled like pancakes. I know. So what was going on? Well, the baby had galactosemia. And I said to the lady, and of course the baby had a wet diaper, and I said to the lady, you need to do something. I smell pancakes. This kid smells like pancakes. What did you do? Did you put something strange on the diaper or something? And she said, you know what? I'll bet that's galactosemia. And I said, I've never smelled it before. Is that what it smells like? It smells like pancakes. Actually, what it smells like is maple syrup. You put maple syrup, or any syrup. Pancakes don't really have that strong an odor until you put the syrup on them. Anyway, so we discovered a child with galactosemia. It was the first one that I'd ever run across, and instead of being a hero, detecting the galactosemia. Galactosemia is not checked in Nebraska. That's where I was. If I'd been in Iowa, they could check for galactosemia. But of course, we identified it by the urine, by the smell of its urine. By the smell of its urine, and of course, they started treating the baby right away. And because they were treating the baby and they put the baby on a special diet, the baby didn't have any of these horrible problems. They tend to have a enlarged liver. They tend to be jaundiced, and this baby was jaundiced, and that's the reason I was up there. I was drawing a bilirubin on the baby. They get cataracts, and the cataracts start about age 2 or 3. But of course, in this case, we detected the galactosemia, and because we detected the galactosemia, they were able to treat the child. Tay-Sachs disease is kind of an interesting disease. This is very much genetic, and the individuals that suffer from Tay-Sachs disease are individuals who are of the Jewish persuasion. In other words, they are Jewish. There are two major groups of Jewish people. If you understand the history of Jewish people, they were kicked out of Israel. They were captured. They were all taken over to Egypt to build the pyramids. And then they were released, or they escaped, or something happened. Anyway, they left. And when they left, these were Middle Eastern people, of course, and when they left, they went on what they referred to as the diaspora. Theoretically, there are 7 tribes of Israel. And of course, we can only find 6, but we're not exactly sure where that 7th tribe is. The Mormons think that the 7th tribe of Israel are the natives, the indigenous peoples that live in the Americas. Okay. But 2 of the groups, one of the groups went to Spain, and they became the Sephardic Jews. They were kicked out of Spain by Isabella, and then she stole all their stuff, all their money, and she financed Columbus's trip to the New World with that money. That doesn't have anything to do with Sephardic Jews. The other group went into Eastern Europe and Western Asia. These became the Ashkenazi Jews. And of course, since they were Jewish, they weren't allowed to. Of course, Jewish people are not supposed to marry any outside the faith, and these individuals kind of intermarried. And they were in little villages, and they weren't allowed to travel, so they tended to repeat genetic problems, the Ashkenazi Jews. And this was a really serious problem since they couldn't travel, 50 miles to go find a likely husband or wife. They all had to marry within the village. And this went on for a couple hundred years, and some of these genetic problems repeated themselves. And that's what Tay-Sachs disease. Unfortunately, Tay-Sachs disease is a problem with the nervous system. The nervous system, it becomes degenerative. Within 2 or 3 years, the child can't move anymore. And of course, they stop breathing and die. Anyway, that's Tay-Sachs disease. It's endemic, not endemic, that's not the right word. It's a genetic flaw with individuals who are Ashkenazi Jews. Those are the ones living in Eastern Europe. Both of these problems, of course, we can detect pre-birth by doing amniocentesis. Galactosemia, of course, we can treat. Tay-Sachs disease, there's nothing we can do for Tay-Sachs disease. So if you did an amniocentesis, one of the things that you would, if you detected Tay-Sachs disease, you give the individual an opportunity to abort the fetus. That's normally what happens because there's nothing else that you can do with Tay-Sachs disease. Okay, so there's 2 more problems. Tuberous sclerosis, this is relatively new. It is the most widely known dominant inherited condition, and as you can see, it causes a skin problem with the baby. It's caused by tuberous calcifications in the brain. It produces intellectual disability and epilepsy. It's a relatively new one. I haven't seen this. I didn't see this while I was in the hospital. What's the other one I was thinking of? Tay-Sachs disease, galactosemia, tuberous sclerosis, whatever it is that would come to me. Oh, alpha-fetoprotein. I was trying to remember, there's a blood test that women can take about starting in the 4th or 5th month of pregnancy. They can take what is known as an alpha-fetoprotein, and from that they can detect whether the baby has spina bifida, whether it has a nervous problem, or whether it has Down syndrome. So they can do a relatively simple blood test, the alpha-fetoprotein, and they can tell if it's low. If the alpha-fetoprotein is low, then they know that the baby has Down syndrome. If it's too high, it means that spinal fluid is leaking into the amniotic fluid, and it causes a high alpha-fetoprotein. So this is one of those blood tests that they do at about the 4th or 5th month. Down syndrome is associated with intellectual impairment as well as a wide variety of physical anomalies. Down syndrome occurs about once in every 700 births, and the risk is strongly linked to maternal age. One of the realities of humanity is that a man produces 30,000 sperm per second. He gets new sex new sex cells every second. A woman is born with all the sex cells she'll ever have. She is born with all the ova that she'll ever produce. And this is one of the reasons why ova get old. So if a woman is in her 30s, in her late 30s or early 40s, depending on when she started her period, it really all depends on menarche. When did she begin? If she didn't begin until 20 and she turns 40, that's only 20 years. That's not that long. But if she started at 8 or 9 years old, menarche at 8 or 9 years old, of course, then her ova are a lot older. They started maturing at an earlier age. And it has to do with how old the ova is as to how viable the ova is. Incidence for women in their 20s is only about 1 per 2,000 births, but for mothers over 45, very, very relatively dangerous, is 1 out of every 25 turns out to have Down syndrome. So it's kind of dangerous for a woman to have a baby later in life, into her 40s. And of course, some women have babies into their 50s, no problems. But of course, 1 out of every 25 women over the age of 45 who gives birth to a Down syndrome baby. This was a real fear that my daughter and I had. She got pregnant at 42. Yeah, she got pregnant at 42. She gave birth just before her 43rd birthday, so we were watching her pregnancy very, very carefully. She had an amniocentesis done, she had an alpha-fetoprotein done, and they were both normal. And I can show you a picture of my grandson. He's gorgeous. The people on this side have already seen my grandson. They're going, oh no, not again. Yeah, okay. The cool thing about this picture is, there he is. There. See how gorgeous he is? His hair used to be blonde, and now it's turning darker and darker all the time. It's turning brown. He's a really good soccer player, obviously. He's a relative of mine. There he is. Okay. The kind of cool thing about this picture is he has a lot of good ball control. This kid has cerebral palsy. The kid in the sunglasses, and that's why he's wearing the sunglasses. He has a hard time stopping, so he runs into kids all the time, which is kind of cool. But my grandson scored 4 times. Actually, he scored all the goals. No, he didn't. He scored 4 of the goals. Okay. He scored 4 times, and then my daughter signaled to him that she didn't want him to score anymore. The score is 4-0. There's no reason to massacre people. So he would drive down the field. He has really good ball control. And then he tried to get this kid to score. The kid with cerebral palsy tried to get him to score. And he passed over and over and over and over again. Finally, the blonde kid scored. He scored a goal. So that was the first game too. So that was kind of cool. And the goal that the other team scored came off my grandson. So he scored all the goals and had 1 assist. As cool as it is. But there he is. You can see he's fine. He doesn't have Down syndrome. And his hair is turning darker. I haven't quite figured that one out yet. But we're going down to visit after school. And hopefully we'll get to see him play soccer. So if you ever decide to play soccer, I guess this is the color of shoes that everybody's wearing this year. It's kind of a greenish, yellowish. Anyway, they're cool kids. So he got the other kid to school, and that was really nice. No, I forgot where I was. Okay. Anyway, okay, and we're going to talk about cerebral palsy in just a second. Down syndrome. So we determined that the kid didn't have, but of course we were scared she'd lose her pregnancy. We were scared that she had, that the baby would have Down syndrome. But of course everything turned out normal. Down syndrome, as you can see, the reason Down syndrome occurs is because there are 3 chromosomes on the 21st pair. And
is that why they call it trisomy 21?
Trisomy 21, exactly. Trisomy 21. Thank you. And that's it. That's Down syndrome. I guess I could have talked more about it. The leading cause of preventable intellectual disability is the effect of maternal alcohol consumption on the developing embryo. And this is really kind of interesting. Doesn't mean that you can't drink during pregnancy. You should stay away from alcohol as much as possible. It doesn't mean you have to stay away continually. You can have a wine from time to time. One of the things that we've determined, the most damage is done when a woman is a binge drinker. So if she abstains for a number of days and then all of a sudden she gets snockered through the weekend, that is the most destructive as far as fetal alcohol syndrome is concerned. If she drinks two drinks a day for her entire pregnancy, she will probably not have create a child with FAS. She'll potentially have a child with FAE, fetal alcohol effect. Of course, you should stay away from alcohol if you certainly can, but the binge drinking seems to be the most destructive type of drinking pattern that the individual can have. FAS produces characteristic biological and psychological impairments, including mild to moderate intellectual disability. One of the things we do know about alcohol is that alcohol has an affinity for brain tissue, whether it's fetal brain tissue or whether it's adult brain tissue, and that's one of the reasons why if you go to the bar and you get a drink, of course you can't do that here, it's a dry reservation, but if you run down to Gallup real fast and go to the bar and take a drink, Even that first beer, of course, you can feel it. You can feel it. It makes you smile or it does something to you. I'm not exactly sure what it does. But it affects everybody. And of course, I was working with one of the researchers that discovered what FAS was way back in the 1980s. He was working at St. Joseph Hospital, who are those? Boys Town Institute at St. Joseph Hospital. And it was really kind of fascinating because he was a drunk. The guy was a drunk. And he'd come in and half the time you couldn't understand what he was saying. But the rest of the time he was fairly lucid. And he would talk about how you can put a drop of alcohol here, and if you take some brain tissue over here, the alcohol will migrate its way over, and it will start affecting the brain tissue. It's really fascinating.
Did it really?
Yeah, it will. It migrates over. It's almost a magnetic effect. So it has an affinity for brain tissue. As odd as that may seem. Anyway, he's the one that. Fetal alcohol syndrome wasn't discovered until into the 1980s. The first paper was written in the 1980s. They first noticed it on the Pine Ridge Reservation. Oddly, or sadly, I guess. But we were working with a different native population. And for a while they thought that it was just something that affected natives. But of course that's certainly not true. It can affect anyone. But there were social strictures again about women drinking. And then, of course, things changed. Women used to not smoke. They always had to wear dresses. And they hardly drank at all, especially during pregnancy. The behavioral ramifications of fetal alcohol syndrome would be diagnosed as neurodevelopmental disorder associated with prenatal alcohol exposure. And, of course, that is FAS. One of the things we know about FAS is that it causes the brain to restructure. One of the things that happens with fetal alcohol syndrome is the corpus callosum is much, much smaller in an individual suffering from fetal alcohol syndrome. The convolutions in the brain aren't as deep. It's not as intricate a brain pattern as we see with individuals that their mother didn't drink during pregnancy. Harmful biological influences that have been either directly or indirectly associated with intellectual disability, poor maternal health, including acute and chronic maternal infections. And this is, of course, something that you have to be careful of. This is one of the reasons that they want you to come in every month. Of course, if you were sick, they would want you to come in every week. One of the things that we used to do when I was in the service, if a woman was pregnant, we did a test for gonorrhea every time she came in. Because that was a really serious problem in the military, was the fact that men were picking up gonorrhea from interesting places. But of course we wanted to make sure that there was no damage being done. We also checked her, that was at the beginning of the herpes epidemic, and we were checking them for herpes as well. There is a problem if the mother is Rh positive and the baby is Rh negative, then the mother has antibodies against the baby's blood. And she will create antibodies. The first baby she has no problem. The second baby, since she has created, these antibodies were created from the first child's blood leaking into her own, then we have an Rh problem. And her blood will kill the baby, will destroy the baby's blood. So we get this we see this from time to time. In the old days, we used to see a lot more. My mother was O positive, and she had 3 Rh positive, negative babies. And those 3 babies were really lucky because there was no leakage. In other words, she wasn't contaminated with the baby's blood, so she didn't build antibodies against them. So she was really lucky. Both of my children, my wife is A positive, and both of my children are Rh negative. So she was given a medication that induced her to not produce antibodies, and that's Rogaine, it's called that stuff. Anyway, neither of my children have a problem. That's the Rh. Anoxia just means no oxygen. The baby, of course, is getting its oxygen from the umbilical cord. If the umbilical cord is pinched off in one way or another, usually during the birth process, wraps around the baby's neck and actually starts strangling the baby in two ways. It strangles the baby because it's around the baby's neck, but it's also cutting off circulation in the umbilical cord, and that can cause anoxia. It's one of the first things that we check for when the baby is born, is that the baby is breathing and there is no damage. We look at the baby to make sure it's not an interesting color. Normally they're nice and pink when they come out. Sometimes, of course, if the anoxia is the case, then the baby will be blue or purple, depending on how long the baby has had any oxygen. If the mother gets radiation during her pregnancy, then she can cause a deformity in the child. Different drugs can cause different problems, especially illicit drugs. And of course, if the baby's born premature, then the baby's not ready to come out yet. And of course, we need to make sure that everything is okay. We need to feed the baby. Baby can't breastfeed. We have to feed the baby. We have to monitor the heart to make sure it's okay. And of course, the brain isn't completely developed yet. So this is a really kind of a serious problem if the baby is born premature. And there's just a ton of stuff out there that can cause all kinds of interesting problems. Interesting infections. Rubella, of course, is one of the measles, rubella and rubeola. Toxoplasmosis is a fungus that is found in cat feces. Why cats? Because cats eat mice and mice have toxoplasmosis. And then, of course, it gets into the feces of the cat, and if the woman cleans out the cat litter box, she can get toxoplasmosis, and it can cause all kinds of interesting problems. Toxoplasmosis, like I said, is just is a fungus, and it's found in birds and rodents. The reason it's found so frequently in rodents is because rodents live in the woods, and in the woods there used to be pigeon manure, and the pigeon manure had fungus and passenger pigeons. Once upon a time, the United States was covered with oak forests, and passenger pigeons bred in the oak forests. Well, luckily I grew up in one of those oak forests, and I had 2 spots on my lungs from toxoplasmosis. I have 2 toxoplasmosis infections because I used to cut wood back in the woods all the time. Anyway, that's toxoplasmosis. Syphilis, of course, cytomegalovirus is a virus that causes all kinds of interesting problems as well. Syphilis we have to stay away from. I think I told you last time that we used to check all the babies. We used to check everybody for syphilis. It was on a continual basis. You know, these guys were coming back from the Philippines and Vietnam, and those places had endemic syphilis. So we had to make sure that the babies were okay, that the mothers were okay, that the fathers were okay, and we checked all the military people for gonorrhea and syphilis all the time. I only found 1 baby that was infected with syphilis. So in my entire time working in the nursery, we only found 1 child with congenital syphilis. And of course, you can treat the baby for that, and they will have no problem. Preterm usually have low birth weight, and that is the biggest problem. As you can see, this baby's hand is really tiny, as you can see. We can save babies up to about 2 pounds, or even lower than that. It all has to do with how long how young they are. We can save babies that they have something new. I just saw this on the internet. They've got a new thing where they put the baby into a plastic bag. Fascinating. Of course, they checked this thing out with animals, but yeah, it looks like they may try it with premature babies. But we can save babies that are as young as 20 weeks. It doesn't happen very often. If they are actually that young, it's 20 weeks is a little bit too young. The brain's not fully developed, the heart's not fully developed, the lungs can't breathe. We have to breathe for the baby. We have to help its heartbeat. We have to feed the baby, certainly, while the brain develops. And of course, we can't really. There shouldn't be too much stimulation while the baby is while the brain is still developing, or it can change the structure of their brains. Anyway, premature infants it's really interesting working with premature infants. Premature infants have greater health risks, of course, in many areas and are at increased risk for intellectual disability and other developmental problems. Put too much oxygen in here, we destroy brain cells. Not enough oxygen, we destroy brain cells. So we have to monitor their oxygen level all the time. So one of the things that we have to do is draw blood gases on the baby on a relatively frequent basis.
So what happens if the mother has, like, for example, my aunt, she has 5 children, and out of those 5 children, she had them all premature due
Oh,
to
my.
health problems. So the last baby, I guess the doctor told her, you can't be doing this anymore. And she wanted to know why she keeps having her babies prematurely. She goes into early labor and everything.
I would
And she wanted to know why, but she said they didn't tell her what was going on. So her last baby, they just removed her uterus.
Oh, my
so she
goodness.
could have no children. And
Is it,
she's trying to find answers why she had all her children premature.
I was just talking to Christine about this downstairs. And maybe I shouldn't because now she left early. Why? There's lots of different reasons why. One reason is because the body gets into a certain position, you get muscle aches. Once the muscle aches start, it causes muscle spasms. Once the muscle spasms start, then we go into false labor or maybe early labor. Yeah, this is a really serious problem. Somebody who is small, somebody who is overweight, a lot of times they have muscle problems, and those muscle problems can cause premature labor. That's one possibility, and there's just a ton of different reasons.
Yeah, but my auntie, she said she's in pretty good shape, no
Okay.
health problems. She's not overweight, she's active.
One of the things that we have discovered, this is one of the things we saw up in Montana, is that, here I'll get it. Native women have more premature babies than any other group, but that's normally because there are a lot of, thank you, Jeff. Normally that's because there are a lot of very, very young women, like in their 13, 14, 15, 16 years old, having babies, and they tend to have premature babies. The other thing that we noticed up there was that native babies tend to be bigger than the average. The average size of a baby in the United States is about 7 to 7.5 pounds, in that range, and their babies tend to be a little bit bigger than that. I really can't tell you what's going on with Marina. I don't know her case. I don't know what's going on. I don't know.
Yeah.
Could be a lot of different reasons. I'm a little bit surprised that they didn't try to find out what was going on, why she had 5 premature babies, but I'm guessing that you're dealing with IHS here on the reservation, or you get a different doctor every time you go in. Okay, that's probably why you know. Why he's not as curious. I mean, if he were following her through her pregnancy, he might, or she, whichever. Yes, ma'am.
So that baby right there is 20 weeks old?
I'm sorry?
That baby's 20 weeks old. Right
Oh, I don't
there?
know. I'm not exactly sure how old this baby is. I don't know. But you can see it's premature. It's pretty tiny.
Hillary Clinton was saying if she got elected, she was going to allow abortions up to 24 weeks old. That's over half the term.
It's legal now.
No?
Yes, it is.
Is it?
Late term abortions are legal.
Yeah.
Sure.
I thought Trump, he did away with it.
He may have done away with it now, but they've been legal for decades. Yeah, for decades. Oh, yeah. Sure. Yeah, late term abortions. They call them late term abortions. Medical interventions have significantly improved the survival ability of premature infants, but they remain at higher risk for cognitive impairment, sensory impairment, and various conditions of the central nervous system. When I was working in the nursery back in the 80s, 20 weeks was impossible. 24 weeks maybe, 28 weeks, yeah, we probably would be okay with that one. So and everything has been moving steadily back, and it's probably a good thing because some women have a difficult time maintaining pregnancy. Sometimes it has to do with the uterus, that the uterus can't maintain itself for an extended length for, 38 weeks, 39 weeks. So there's just tons of different reasons why.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, I think it is the uterus. Or uterus.
Yeah, sometimes it doesn't, it doesn't adhere very well. It's not a very strong connection.
Because after all the deliveries was through C-section.
Through C-section?
Yeah, and she had a problem after every delivery.
Mhm.
She would get stopped bleeding. So I think
Oh,
it was her
okay.
uterus, yeah.
That could be, she could have a fibroid tumors in her uterus. There's a lot of different reasons. My sister couldn't have babies because her uterus was too, it wasn't flexible enough. It wouldn't expand. It was just too fibroid. And so she was never able to have babies. Yes, ma'am?
My question would be like more into like the chromosomes.
Okay.
You know, like, I know some pregnancies, they self-terminate themselves based
Right.
on the chromosomes.
As a matter of fact,
Certain
it's like
amount.
80%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how, like, what's the latest? Like, can that happen later on in pregnancy, like at 6 or 7?
Well, the odd thing is that we have trisomy
Yeah.
18 and trisomy 21, and these things are chromosomal abnormalities that don't terminate.
Tournament, yeah.
Yeah, well, of course, with trisomy 18, the baby rarely survives for longer than a year.
Mhm.
So,
And some of these miscarriages, would it be due to the fact that the mom's chromosomes and the father's chromosomes aren't matching, or they can't link or can't compare? Would that be a reason why, or is that more early in the state than later?
well, if usually it's the father's chromosomes are the odd person
Mhm.
out.
Yeah.
Okay. And some women will lose all their male pregnancies, and but they can maintain female pregnancies. I mean, these kinds of things happen.
Okay.
Okay,
So that's just another one.
there's just a ton of different reasons.
Okay.
I have a niece that had 8 pregnancies and 4 live births, and she lost 4 of her
Half
pregnancies.
pretty much, yeah.
And they blamed it on, I didn't realize this, but her husband was an alcoholic.
Mhm.
And she was losing her pregnancies because of some
Chromosomal
chromosomal abnormality
deficiency
caused by
because
his
of
his heavy drinking.
Yeah.
And the 4 that she was able to keep, he had gone off
The booze.
the booze for a while, yeah. But the ones that she lost were the surprise pregnancies.
So you could say that a lot of miscarriages and abortions aren't solely like the female's problem, but it
Oh, no,
also could be a male problem.
It
as
could be,
well?
yeah, it could be a male problem
So
as
it's
well.
not
It could be a
just-
chromosomal abnormality of the male. This is especially, now we know that marijuana causes a lot of
Oh, yeah.
abnormalities, really a lot of serious problems. So that could be a reason. It could have something to do with marijuana.
Are you sure? Or is it proven that?
Oh, yeah.
marijuana-
Yeah, we know that.
Really?
Yeah, it causes abnormal forms, it causes motility problems, yeah. Yeah, marijuana's a real serious problem.
Is that if the mother smokes?
No, it's
the
father. It's the father.
Yeah,
It's a
the
smoke.
father.
So if the father was smoking weed and like if they're trying to get pregnant, sometimes it won't work.
Yeah.
Also?
I didn't say it wouldn't work.
Mhm.
It can work, sure it can.
Just, yeah.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
it's not as likely to work. It's just like alcohol. Well, we'll go into having sex. You're less likely to be able to have sex if everybody's drunk. Let's say that. But you might think you did and not realize you didn't. Okay. But that's a problem with alcohol. Alcohol causes all kinds of interesting problems. Here's a problem of your thyroid. It's known as cretinism. Cretinism, sudden physical and mental development caused by impaired functioning by the thyroid gland, one cause of which is an iodine-deficient diet. So if you live in the middle of the country, the middle of nowhere where there was no sea and there's no iodine in the salt, then potentially you might have this problem. People living in Michigan and Indiana and Illinois and Ohio, not Kentucky, because Kentucky there was a sea that came up to their borders, and they have salt licks, and some of it, most of it has iodine in it. It's called brown salt. As long as it was brown salt, it had iodine, and of course they were okay. But people in Indiana and Michigan, this is one of the reasons why they had to start iodizing salt, because they had so many people in Ohio and Michigan and Indiana who had goiters, had thyroid problems, intellectual disability, and this is usually severe in the case of cretinism, is accompanied by certain characteristic physical features, including stunted growth, dry skin, coarse hair, and a large head. I have a picture of somebody who is suffering from cretinism, but it's really kind of a depressing picture, so I didn't put it in this one, in this lecture. Preventive efforts such as the wide availability of iodized salt have led to the virtual elimination of this condition in the Western world. Really kind of interesting, this argument I have with my wife every time she's buying salt. I tell her to buy Morton salt, buy Morton's iodized salt, damn it. And my wife, of course, who is from Georgia, and she used to get fresh seafood all the time, she doesn't need it. But of course, I've grown up in Indiana and I can eat fish. So I have an iodized salt need that she doesn't recognize. My cruel, cruel, and evil wife won't buy me iodized salt. Well, she does. Of course she does. Anytime I ask her to. She doesn't, well, she just doesn't think about it. She doesn't know how important it is to me that I get my iodized salt. My mother had goiter when she was a child. Of course, my mother was born in 1915. And she has passed away now, but my mother had goiter when she was a child. And it was because of no iodized salt. Morton started putting iodine in their salt. And of course, Morton salt is out of Chicago, right in the middle right in the middle of the goiter world.
What about sea salt? Has that got iodine in it?
I'm sorry?
Sea salt?
Yeah, sea salt has iodine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But in the old days, of course, you couldn't get sea salt.
Well, you know, salt is bad for you, right?
Salt can be bad for you, but not for me because I need my iodine. Does it raise my blood pressure? I don't have that problem. So I guess it's not so bad for me. We all have different needs, I guess. I grew up in Indiana where I needed iodine. Other problems you can have that will cause intellectual disabilities, encephalitis, meningitis, of course, head trauma, brain trauma, tumors, and epilepsy, shaken baby syndrome, where the baby is still small and they shake them. And they cause brain damage. They also cause nerve damage to the baby. Lead poisoning, of course. We used to paint our walls with lead-based paint. We don't do that anymore. We've gotten smarter. And hydrocephaly. Hydrocephaly is where the brain fills up with fluid. It's cerebrospinal fluid. It's supposed to be there, but of course, since the child is accumulating more than it needs, it kills brain cells and can cause intellectual disability. So hydrocephaly, or as Bill Cosby used to say, waterhead. They have an extra large head because of the accumulation of fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid. I have no idea why I put this picture up here. It doesn't have anything to do with what I'm talking about. I don't know why. Psychological and social factors can produce deficits in intelligence, extreme deprivation and isolation, inadequate intellectual stimulation, quality of prenatal interaction. In other words, if the mother doesn't pay attention to the child, if the child is deprived and isolated, then they will have intellectual disabilities. They need intellectual stimulation. Babies need intellectual stimulation. So how do you stimulate a 3-day-old or a 5-day-old or a 7-day-old? We used to do this all the time. You interact with them, you can talk to them, and the baby will actually talk back. It'll try to move its lips just like you did. I used to teach babies to stick their tongues out, which I got in all kinds of trouble for. I did that with my nieces My sister married a guy from, who was a second generation Polish. And his mother, of course, was Polish. So the grandmother was Polish. Anyway, evidently in Poland it means something really nasty because I taught the babies to stick their tongues out. And so the grandmother goes, Busha goes over to change the baby's diaper, and the baby starts sticking its tongue out. And she just went berserk. She went ballistic. And I wasn't allowed to change the baby's diapers anymore because I taught them how to stick their tongues out. As evil as that is, do you know what that means in Polish? Sticking your tongue out?
Must be bad.
That must be horrible. I have no idea. IQ change in identical twin boys rescued at age 7 from abuse. After 6 years of environmental enrichment and therapy, their IQs rose to normal range. And this was a study done by Kulachova in 1976. I have no idea why I put that picture up, but it means something. I can't remember what it is. It is important to act to control as many of the conditions that cause intellectual disability as possible. Family planning should include consideration of maternal age. This is a really big question back on the East Coast. Women are putting off having babies until they're in their late 30s or early 40s. They were told a couple decades ago that they could do this. Yes, go ahead, establish. This is during the feminist movement. They were told, yes, go ahead, establish your career, and then you can always have babies later on. You can have babies until you stop until you go through menopause. But now we know, of course, that's not really the way it is. If you're going to have babies, you need to have babies probably before age 28. And if you don't have babies before age 28, there's always a danger, as we just saw with women in their 40s. This can be a problem. So in your family planning, you need to think about how old the lady is. There used to be a biological clock that ticked. I'm not exactly sure if the biological clock is working anymore. A lot of people aren't having children, or deciding not to have children, or deciding to delay having children. My daughter just didn't like kids. She hated kids until she got around one of them, and then a baby, and then all of a sudden she fell in love and decided that she could raise kids better than anybody else. She was a teacher, and she decided that, by God, she could raise kids better than anybody else. If my dad can do it, if he was a single parent and raised me without any problems, then my baby will be twice as good as I am, since my dad screwed me up. Anyway, she decided to have a baby at age 42. And she was married before, but I don't know. No, anyway, I didn't argue with her. Like I said, I keep trying to get my son to impregnate somebody, but he won't knock anybody up, and he never has. He must be pretty smart. He's a mathematician, so yeah, I guess that whole rhythm system thing actually works for him. Damn it. He's too smart. Those math guys. During pregnancy, the fetus must be properly nourished while exposure to alcohol or other toxins is eliminated, and of course this is what you need to do. Maternal health should be monitored and infections should be avoided. After birth, an enriched and stimulating environment is important, both in school and at home. And one of the things we noticed, Taiwanese children, they all have a desk where they do their homework, which is kind of important. So if you have a desk, then you're more likely to be stimulated to do your homework. Enrichment programs target perceptual, motor, cognitive, language, and social emotional development. Early intervention programs have demonstrated their effectiveness in reducing the risk of cultural, familial, intellectual disability. Once upon a time, individuals who were poor had a really serious problem in school. And one of the reasons is because they weren't getting, they didn't understand how important education was. So they weren't getting any stimulation early in life. If you were wealthy, then you sent your child to kindergarten, and now they started this whole pre-K thing. My grandson has been going to school since he was 2. I'm not exactly sure what they call it. All he does is play most of the time.
Pre-Head Start.
Head Start. Well, it's not Head Start. He's not going to Head Start.
It's pre-Head Start.
Pre-Head Start. Well, it's something at a college. and all these kids, they, you know, and he's got all of his best friends are there. And all of a sudden, all the boys have like disappeared, and he's in class with one guy and like 6 or 7 females. It's really kind of interesting. Of course,
Well, even daycare can be like Head Start.
you know, I think that was probably some kind of daycare. Anyway, so once upon a time, we had this problem, and then they, during the Johnson administration, they passed a law that allowed them, they gave money to the Head Start program, and that's when Head Start started, back in the 60s. Now here's the interesting thing that happened. So Head Start is for people that don't have a whole lot of money. If you're wealthy, of course, you put your kid in school starting at age 2 or 3 or whatever. But so that's what was happening on the East Coast. But there was no Head Start anyplace until, of course, Johnson passed the law. So they started taking these children that normally wouldn't start school until they were 6 years old, and now they were putting them in school at 3 and 4. And all of a sudden, the poor kids were outstripping the rich kids, the wealthy kids. And of course, the wealthy people got upset about it, or real upset about it, claimed that the United States was trying to, the federal government, especially the damn Democrats, were trying to reverse things in the United States. And so then they started Head Start for everybody, I guess. Special education programs within schools, of course, will enrich anyone's intellectual capabilities. For more serious cases, treatment occurs within residential living facilities, treatment facilities, or institutions to support such persons. Structured behavior modification is very useful in training important skills such as self-care, language, daily living abilities, and the prevention of self-injury. Behavior modification is where it's usually the token system where you reward them for doing what they're supposed to do. You give them a token of one ilk or another, one form or another. Sometimes it's candy or just tickets or whatever. A comprehensive review of behavioral interventions for self-injury involving mostly persons with severe or profound intellectual disability found both reinforcement and punishment-based techniques to be effective. Reinforcement, of course, is what we try to use. If we have to, of course, we use the punishment-based techniques if we have to. There are no medications that treat intellectual disability, although there are a variety of antipsychotic, sedative, and tranquilizing drugs that can be used to control behavioral problems. Now this is kind of interesting because here we are, these individuals have an intellectual deficit, it's an intellectual disability, and we're giving them antipsychotic drugs. It's usually to control their behavior. We can't teach them anything, we can't deal with them because they're too active, we can't force them to pay attention to us. So we have started using all of these different tranquilizers, sedatives, and antipsychotics, which is kind of interesting. However,
I have a story. Can I tell you
okay,
a story?
yes,
Okay.
please.
All right, I know this is really bad, but when I was pregnant with my son, I was working for some disabled people, and I was taking care of them. And I put them in the van, and I tied them down and everything. And one guy, I remember his name was Tim.
You fastened their seatbelts, you didn't tie them down.
Oh, yeah. I fastened their seatbelts. And he had like a real short torso, so he wasn't fully developed,
Mhm.
but he was a man,
Mhm.
but he couldn't talk, but he had long arms. So the other guy, his name was Tom, and I did the same thing, and he couldn't talk at all, but they're both in wheelchairs. So I was taking them to the learning center where they go every day and they get paid to do
Mhm.
this, and I was going around the corner, and it's like the first time I was driving a big van, and I look in my rearview mirror and they're gone.
Oh no.
They are gone, and I'm like 7 months pregnant, way out here. My heart was pounding and everything, and I was like, holy crap. So I just drove past the learning center, and I went onto the other block, and I pulled over, and I was like, where did they go? Did I close the door? Did they fall out, So I ran over to the back of the door, and I really feel bad. This is my I don't know. But anyway, I
True
really feel
confessions, that's
bad, yeah, and I opened the door and they were both just laying there.
Oh,
I know, and so, you know, I was pregnant, I picked them up and put them in their chairs and everything, and then we went back to Learning Center, and so I picked them up, and before this, you know, they never had gone like
right.
and I hear this one lady said, "Oh, it's almost a happened. I've never seen him scared like this." I know, so that's my confession. I just had to tell you guys.
It was probably the best day of their lives. They got to, like a
But
roller
they
coaster
couldn't
ride.
talk. I know. Thank you guys for listening.
It is sad.
If anything, you have to say this to pregnancy. If that is a real thing.
They know all the effectiveness of various drug therapies at best only offer weak support. And of course, this is the problem. Here we are medicating these individuals so that we can control them. One of the things that we know about what's going on right now is that these individuals are living the far more meaningful lives than they ever have in the past. When I was a child, back in the 50s and 60s, these individuals would have been institutionalized. They wouldn't have been stimulated at all. They would have been locked up in rooms. And, you know, it's really kind of a sad situation. Now, of course, they take them to the Learning Center. I mean, all these things are taking place, and we're trying to make their lives as meaningful as we possibly can, and as normal as possible. In the old days, of course, wow, it was pretty bad. But one of the things that's happening now is that we're trying to control their behavior, and that's why we're giving them all of these interesting drugs. And of course, this is relatively controversial. We give somebody an antipsychotic drug, and they become fairly non-functional. So this is relatively controversial, and it all depends on where you are as to how much medication or whether they give them medication at all. It really all depends on how much money is available to work with the individuals, and of course that's the biggest question. There are a lot of individuals that really don't like having to pay all that money to take care of these people. They really do. Yes, ma'am.
Now that they have the intellectual disability, but with the medication combined with that, might kick them into some kind of psychosis that could add another.
Well, potentially it
disability
can, yeah, of course it
to
could.
what to condition they already have.
Right, well, what's happening now is there are aspects of their personality that people can't control, and because of that, they want to control them the best way they possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
So they're using the medication, and sometimes it has to do with people that are too lazy to deal with it. Yeah. It's the same way with autism. Back in the old days, about 70% of people that suffered from autism didn't ever learn to talk, but that's because we weren't dealing with them in the proper manner. Once they discovered how to do that, then we had to find the money to pay for that, for people doing that. And of course, now we have advanced to the point where it's relatively not that rare. It's somewhere between 15 and 30% can't speak. In the old days, it was 70%. And almost all these kids were institutionalized. And there was, of course, they had no stimulation whatsoever. Have you ever seen the movie Rain Man? There's a reason why Rain Man is still in an institution. And the reason is because there's been nobody that wanted to take care of him. The use of medications to control challenging behavior in these intellectual disability remains common, unfortunately, of course, or fortunately. Sometimes there's just nothing you can do to control their behavior, so you have to medicate.
Now, another thing, when the doctors are prescribing these medications, are they looking into like the family's background as far as like what they're prone to? What kind of things they could possibly avoid making it
all
worse?
depends on how good your doctor is.
Yes. Or how well of a patient you are to ask for those things yourself.
Exactly.
Okay.
I would imagine that if you're dealing with IHS, you're dealing with a rotation of doctors, and
I don't think that's quite true though, because like with us, we have a group home, we call it a group home. And, my cousin, she was in there from practically birth to the day she died, so like almost 60 years. And she had intellectual disability, really bad. But anyway, the whole town of Browning knows them. The whole town of Browning knows everybody that's in there. And I think that they don't get the same kind of, they don't go to IHS. I
Okay.
think they go to, I'm pretty sure I heard this, but I think they have their own special doctors in Great Falls.
Oh, that's
you know?
great.
Yeah, and I think the state of Montana
Right.
really takes care of them, because the group home I worked in, we had this young lady in there, well, she was like in her 30s, and she had intellectual disability, and, we really took care of her, you
Sure.
know? Everybody, we had like maybe 6 different group homes on the Salish Kootenai Tribal Reservation, and they were really nice. So I think it might be a
State
little
by
bit
state?
different on the reservations. You know, I think they get better care and better treatment just because they have the IHS, that medical in their state.
One of the things that I noticed, the other thing that we need to talk about is we're talking about a native population, and we're also talking about a non-native population. And the non-native population, of course, they don't have IHS, they don't have all of the other things. And not only that, but on a reservation, you've got individuals that really care about their families.
Yeah.
Extended families off the reservation, not so
Not
much.
so
Yeah.
much.
So yes, everybody knows everybody in the home in Browning. Of course they do. It's the same way at Fort Belknap. They have an individual that is almost 60 years old, has Down syndrome, and this guy goes to all the powwows. Everybody loves him. He gives everybody a hug when he sees people, and it's because if he were in a non-native population, he doesn't do this with people off the reservation, but he does this with people on the reservation, but everybody responds to it, and he's everybody's favorite person. But if we had somebody off the reservation, they would potentially he'd be institutionalized, he'd be locked into someplace, they wouldn't let him walk around. This guy is like the mayor of Fort Belknap. He's just a fabulous guy, he's so cool. And he knows my name, or he did, he probably doesn't know my name. Hell, half the other people without any intellectual disability didn't know who the hell I was. Half the people I taught don't remember who I was. Anyway, this guy knew my name every time he saw me. One time they were dancing. It was at the outdoor powwow at Fort Belknap, and he was on the other side of the powwow. He was at the other side of the circle, and I had just come in, and I was standing there, and he said, "Bruce!" and he came running across. They were dancing out in the middle. And of course, nobody paid attention to him because he's everybody's favorite person. Then he came over and gave me a big hug. Kind of nice. He knows who I am.
We have one guy that has intellectual disability, my age.
Uh-huh.
He gets drunk.
Oh no,
Yeah, he gets drunk, and he has Facebook, and
that's not good.
and I think it's not a severe case, but
Right.
it's like a mild case,
Right.
But he's like everybody's favorite person, so everybody talks to him on Facebook, and he recently had like a stroke or something.
Oh no.
He has girlfriends that will take his money.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it's just bad.
Black people.
Yeah.
What's wrong with those guys? Okay, specific learning disorders. Combines a DSM-4 diagnosis of reading disorder, mathematic disorder, disorder of written expression, and learning disorder not otherwise specified. So they stuck all these together, and now they're called specific learning disorders. Diagnosis requires difficulties in learning and academic skills involving reading, spelling, writing, or mathematics, in which measured abilities are below what would be expected by the student's chronological age. Together, specific learning disorders may affect from between 5 and 15% of the population. And of course, it all depends on where you are as to how many of these individuals you're dealing with. IEPs, this is where IEPs come from in high schools or grade schools or junior high schools. These are the individuals that they're talking about. I get IEPs here. I don't get IEPs here. I got them in Ashford, but I don't get them here. Telling me if any of you guys have any of these problems, which none of you do, obviously. The difficulties that lead to this diagnosis cannot be due to intellectual disability, and they must have persisted for 6 months or more in spite of attempts to remediate them. The diagnosis includes specifiers for areas of impairment, with impairment in reading, with impairment in written expression, and of course with impairment in mathematics. They're either mild, moderate, or severe. So your specific learning disabilities have to do with those aspects. Reading difficulties may involve errors in comprehension, slow reading, and oral substitutions, distortions, or omissions. The condition has also been called dyslexia, and of course, this is what in the old days we used to call it dyslexia. I guess it's still a viable name, but now we just refer to them as reading difficulties. As many as 80% are males, although this may be biased, as boys are more likely to show disruptive behavior along with the reading dysfunction and thus attract diagnostic attention. My father had dyslexia. I didn't know this. Well, I tried to read his writing. You can't read his writing. My mother learned how to do that. But my dad had dyslexia, and it's one of the reasons why he never went to college. He was a math whiz, but he had dyslexia, and maybe part of his mathematic capability had to do with the fact that he really couldn't understand the written word as well, but he could understand numbers. He was a banker, which is kind of cool, but they'd give him a column of figures, and he would add them up in his head, in like 10 or 15 seconds, he'd have this whole column of numbers added up, and he was always right. It was really kind of interesting because he would go, the clerks, of course, had to check out every night, and he would just look at their figures, and he could figure out whether they were checking out correctly or incorrectly. He was kind of a cool guy. Usually people had to do it on an adding machine, and here my dad's doing it instead. It was kind of cool.
So dyslexia is considered a intellectual disability?
Well, it's a specific learning disorder. Sure, dyslexia. He read okay, I guess. But his writing was horrible, just horrible. I mean, it looked like Donald Trump's signature.
My husband has dyslexia and letters. Like when he does math problems, he can't write them down on paper.
Oh.
So he adds it in his
He has to
head.
do everything
Yeah,
himself.
but when he has to write it down, he mixes up the numbers.
That's called transposition. Makes up the numbers. I do that with telephone numbers sometimes. It gets kind of interesting when you're dialing somebody and you don't have the numbers quite right. Mathematical difficulties can include the linguistic, perceptual, attentional, and computational skills involved in mathematic achievement. Disorder of written expression, of course mathematics is one kind. Disorder of written expression is characterized by deficient writing skills, often including combinations of poor handwriting, poor grammar and punctuation, common spelling errors, and poor organization of paragraphs or sentences. My dad's only problem was his handwriting was so god-awful. It was just horrible. We have all of his, he was in World War II, landed at Normandy, and he ended up in Fulda, which is over by Berlin, and he walked all the way through Germany, or he rode all the way through Germany. Don't let him tell you that he walked. Anyway, so he wrote letters home to my mother, and of course we can't read them. It's really kind of tragic. All these love letters, and we can't read them. It can be associated with perceptual, motor, or language deficits, the written expression. And of course, he just had really horrible handwriting. Everything was a lump, I guess. And some people sign their names that way. You can read if I sign my name, you know what the hell my name is. Okay? If Sarah signs her name, who the hell knows who it is? It could be anybody.
If,
And I can't even identify any of the letters.
you said that FAS was really discovered in the 1980s. Was that like basically the first case, or?
No, it wasn't the first case. It was the first time we ever put all those things together.
Oh, okay, because my auntie, she's like 50, she doesn't look like she has FAS, but I think what they are trying to say is she's got FAE.
FAE.
Yeah, and we found her, just sitting in a stroller on the side of the road, but, anyway, she has FAE, and they told her if she ever was to drink alcohol, that, she would probably develop FAS. And then, my two cousins.
She may be have an addictive personality, but she's not going to develop FAS.
Okay, and then my two cousins, their their mother had, I think she had 12 kids, and they were one set of two twins, and they had FAE, and they were told the same thing. That's what they tell them back home. If you were to drink, you would develop the FAS syndrome and all that. And so they've never drank or anything like
Good.
that. And
They may have an addictive personality.
they're really scared, yeah, but one of them can't have kids. But so it would be called FAE, not FAS.
Fetal alcohol effect. Fetal alcohol effect is a more mild form of FAS. FAS is physical deformities and intellectual disability. So it causes all kinds of interesting things. Like this thing's not there for them. This little thing right here.
How could somebody be born with FAS and their parents not drink or anything? Because I see people that are like that and they don't, it's not there, their parents,
No. FAS is specifically alcohol. It must be something else. It must be something else. But FAS is fetal alcohol syndrome. Specifically has to do with drinking during pregnancy. So, I guess there's a possibility something else happened, such as maybe tobacco smoke. Nicotine can cause all kinds of interesting problems. Tobacco is a vasoconstrictor. It makes your blood vessels constrict. So if you smoke during pregnancy, while you're smoking, you're strangling the baby for oxygen. So potentially the baby's going to be small. They're going to have they may potentially have all kinds of interesting problems depending on how much you smoked. They could have SIDS. They could develop SIDS because when you smoke tobacco, one of the things that happens is the carbon monoxide detecting organ in your brain doesn't develop. So normally, if you're strangling yourself to death, you can tell it and you automatically move. But if these guys don't do that, they can't do that because that organ's missing. They will just strangle themselves to death as babies, of course.
And pneumothorax too, huh?
Pneumothorax.
Yeah. Is that one of the tobacco signs of a pregnant
Oh, you mean
baby?
pneumonia, the possibility of
Of a
developing?
lung collapsing and they swallow their own feces during birth?
Well,
Pneumothorax.
I don't think that's what it's called.
It is.
Okay.
I'll
I'll
bet you 20.
Okay. Great. I'm gonna lose money. All I have are quarters left. Somebody took all my money. What are we talking about? DSM-5 defines specific learning disorder as having a biological origin causing a dysfunction in the brain without being more specific. Prematurity, low birth rate, and prenatal exposure to nicotine are listed as risk factors, of course. So it's probably the dumbest thing that you can do. Well, it's not the dumbest thing you can do. There's a lot of dumber things you can do besides smoking, like shooting up with heroin, like my niece, my great niece. Specific learning disorders, especially involving reading and math, tend to run in families, and so we see this. My son doesn't have dyslexia, but he's a math whiz just like my father was. So evidently some of these things run in the family. I didn't pick anything good up, okay? I know, I can barely add and subtract. When learning disorders are comorbid with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, outcomes tend to be poorer. because the kid doesn't pay attention as well as having a problem. Significant correlations between the specific learning disorders may suggest they interrelate at a more basic level. Symptoms may persist into adulthood for up to 4% of the population. So these are the individuals that have these learning disabilities that will continue. My father didn't have that problem, evidently, because he was in the Army and he was a clerk. First he was a clerk, wrote a lot of reports, had no problems whatsoever. So evidently he could read, and he could read orders and whatnot. And he added really well. Now, this is motor disorders. These are really kind of interesting. These are conditions in which a deficit in motor coordination or delay in meeting motor development milestones interferes with academic or daily life. These include developmental coordination disorder, stereotypic movement disorder, and tic disorders. Okay, tic disorders. Tourette syndrome is a tic disorder. Motor disorders involves a deficit in motor coordination or delay in meeting motor development milestones interfering with academic or daily life. Motor disorders are diagnosed when clumsiness is not due to a physical disability such as cerebral palsy or muscular dystrophy, nor is it characteristic of the motor difficulties associated with intellectual disability. Okay, and this has to do with motor disorders. I was talking about cerebral palsy, the kid that has cerebral palsy. He's clumsy, and the reason he's clumsy is because he can't control his muscles as well as he should due to cerebral palsy. For diagnosis to qualify, motor deficiencies must be severe enough to interfere with normal activities of daily living. The DSM-5 reports the prevalence between 5% and 6% of children aged between 5 and 11 years. And this is the reason why you take your kid in every quarter? Every year? Just once a year? Okay. This is why you take them in every year, and they measure this, and they talk about that, and they want to know where they are as far as these milestones are concerned. Because what they're trying to do is detect problems. They're not trying to say, oh, geez, you're only at the 33rd percentile. They're not trying to embarrass you or insult the child. What they're trying to do is determine if they have these problems. If they have these problems, they can start treating them. And if you start treating them early enough, of course, they are less severe. They will potentially alleviate to some extent. In some cases, it persists in adulthood, of course, these coordination problems. Okay. In stereotypic movement disorder, the key feature is motor behavior that is non-functional and repetitive, body rocking, hand waving or shaking, eye poking, head banging, face slapping, and self-biting. The more destructive things we see very rarely. These on the top, the hand waving and the body rocking, we see all the time. As a matter of fact, I see it in my students from time to time. They will be upset about something, they'll start rocking back. Risk factors may include social isolation or environmental stress. Obviously she's got a hand waving problem. Sometimes they will walk on their toes, or when they run, they'll go way up on their toes to run, which is the way I run, but that's because I run really fast. Okay, but and these are problems as well. When they walk, they can't walk, they have to go way up on their toes in order to walk, and that's another potential problem that they have. Some genetic conditions such as Rett syndrome also contribute to stereotypic movement disorder. Those are the ones that wring their hands all the time. That's Rett syndrome. This is a problem that only happens in girls, never happens in boys. The skull doesn't grow, and it squeezes the brain, and they get this strange thing called Rett syndrome. But they wring their hands all the time, to the point that they will wear swords on their hands, and they won't stop. They can't stop. Prevalence may be between 10% and 15% of those with intellectual disability living in residential facilities. So if you go to one of these places, a lot of times you will see an individual with a problem, with a movement problem. They either have a hand-waving thing or body rocking, especially body rocking. We knew that my niece, she suffers from schizophrenia. We knew that she had a problem because she would rock herself to sleep at night. She would rock herself. If you tried rocking her, of course, you couldn't move fast enough. in order to stimulate her enough to make her go to sleep is really kind of odd. We knew she had a problem at that stage. And of course her mother would admit it. So, and she thought it was great because she could just put the baby to sleep. She could just put the baby in the crib and the baby would rock herself to sleep. She didn't have to rock her to sleep. As silly as that sounds. There is support for behavioral methods that provide aversive consequences contingent on the self-injurious acts while simultaneously shaping competing responses. And of course, this is one of the ways that we try to alleviate the self-injurious, especially the self-injurious behavior. Of course, the self-injurious behavior, eye-poking, head-banging, face-slapping, and self-biting. This is the stuff that we try to stop. Now, normally what we will do is we will replace them with something. We try to replace them with something that is non-injurious, of course, but sometimes body rocking is the only thing that we can get them to do that will stop them from hurting themselves. Case reports have indicated that opiate receptor site blocker naltrexone has been useful for some individuals with self-injurious behavior. So we've used naltrexone or naloxone is the same stuff. Anyway, we use it. Yeah, I know it's time to stop. So let's stop right here. We'll pick this up next time. I don't know if I'm going to get through this thing, but there is a test. I wrote it this weekend.